In the early decades of this century, American architects, usually trained in the tradition of European styles, practiced their art as members of the last generation of architects who would consider their ideas as possessing a symbiotic relationship between their personal sense of form and their completed structures. This is portrayed by the lovingly hand-drawn plans and the fatherly supervision that typically took place during the construction of their buildings. One such architect was Jesse Barloga, who practiced his art in a small city in the hinterlands between the great pillars of architectural styles on the east and west coasts of the United States. Barloga would not only contribute his own legacy of architectural traditions to history, but would leave a legacy of beautifully crafted domestic designs to the people of Rockford, Illinois. A purebred Midwesterner, Barloga was born on February 15, 1888, in Pecatonica, Illinois, where, in 1915, he would design his first architectural work, a house for his parents. Like most architects of that generation, Barloga grew up in a family that was both materially comfortable and culturally active. His father was a successful inventor of business ventures. His grandmother was a concert singer in Europe. Such an environment would continue to envelop Barloga throughout his life, as his wife, Viola, whom he married in 1915, would lend her own fine arts abilities to many of her husband's interior designs. Barloga received his degree in architecture from the University of Illinois in 1911, and in 1919 opened his own office in Rockford. Future associates who would work in his office during those years of success still remember him as a personality and an architect. Three of those associates, Ray Lindquist, Morgan Haymaker, and Ray Noland, offer some first-hand recollections.
Jess was a real interesting man to work for. He would come to you and he would tell you that he had this client that wanted a home. They wanted about so many square feet, so many rooms. And you would sit down with never having met the party, but you would have this little knowledge, and he wanted you to start making the plan, which you did. You'd come to work in the morning and the plan was gone, but what you was working on was gone. So you'd sit there and you could really rest for a couple hours in the morning, and pretty soon Jess would come in, and he had taken this plan with him home. He had it all in his head, but he didn't have the ability to impart that to you, only gradually. But then he had taken what you started and he made something of it.
Jess was a very amiable individual. He was very studious. He was very strict in the office, but was 100% different away from the office. He had a lot of friends. He was a deep thinker and enjoyed his work.
I think Jess had varied points of view, as I think they show up in the various different homes he did, and mostly in his homes. But a little story, if I may. Jess used to like to sit down after working hours and talk architecture. And I'd be going out the door, and he'd call me into his office, and he'd, "Hey, I want to talk to you about something." And it might go on 6, 7, 8 o'clock. Very interesting. But this particular day, he called me in, and he said, "I was down driving through Camp Grant area. And he says, there's a building down there. I'd like you to come down and see it with me." It was a storage building, but it was a brick building, and is undoubtedly architectural designed, and was quite interesting, quite modern in a way, and Jess was quite taken with it. That was completely out of the role that he used as far as his homes are concerned.
Like most young architects in those years, who were just beginning their careers, Barloga's commissions were a combination of designs for modest civic structures and remodelings for commercial buildings. In his design for a public comfort station in 1921, Barloga reveals early in his development a mastery of historical styles as well as a talent for creative detailing. We see in this work the imaginative transformation of a small functional building into a miniature version of late 19th century eclecticism. The exterior of the Masonic building, remodeled earlier in 1919, clearly displays yet another historical reference. The horizontal alignment of the second floor windows with pediments were typical of 16th century Italian Renaissance architecture, and the large round arches resemble early classical forms. Barloga's most productive years would be from 1924 to 1929, during which he demonstrated the depth of his abilities and his dedication to elegant and well-crafted domestic designs. He would have the luxury of commissions from Rockford's social elite, who would provide the kind of economic support that would allow Barloga to pursue high style and the use of authentic materials. In turn, this clientele would demand particular stylistic displays that were popular among the economic elite. Versions of classical and Georgian styles and a variety of romantic styles, such as the English cottage, were usually preferred. revivalist styles used by Barloga in his residential works were modified by practical considerations. Typically, he designed houses for newly plotted suburban lots and incorporated contemporary ideas into spatial arrangements and planning. These period house designs represented changing times in which the machine age affected traditional architectural concepts. In America, this created an emphasis on particular traditional styles, including the English cottage, Spanish hacienda, and the rustic East Coast farmhouse.
That's where your period design disappeared when it went out of the hands of the architect. Whether it will come back or not, that's very questionable. Because now you can go to a design outfit and you tell them what you're looking for and they'll say, well, come back tomorrow. And they'll scratch out some plans, but they're not architectural plans.
In these revivalist gems, replete with richly detailed forms, Barloga showed his talent and command of architectural synthesis, a blend of planning and design that easily combined everyday function with architectural statement. A more focused look at Barloga's best works illuminates distinctions that make his designs more architectural than might be expected in the hinterlands. His imaginative transformation of European styles and highly creative use of familiar detailing make his buildings outstanding and easy to identify.
The thing that impressed me mostly about Jesse Barloga, that his work was of a period design. As I said, if he was a French house, it was a French house, or Spanish, it was Spanish. He tried to keep them within that period of which he was trying to duplicate. He didn't vary much from it. And I think that's what's outstanding about going looking at his work today.
Such distinctions are also seen in Barloga's thematic use of favorite forms from one design to another, such as a special kind of bay window called an oriel. An oriel is a window that projects out from the wall, supported by brackets. The oriel was a distinctive feature of the Tudor style of 16th century England, from which Barloga derived many of his English cottage designs. During the Depression years and those of World War II, there were comparatively few patrons for Barloga's practice. But this was the time in his career when he would produce some of his best and major works. In 1931, he became involved in a monumental project that almost pushed him into the world of modern architecture.
The News Tower was built in two sections, was it not?
Yep.
The first part was the south end, and the tower was the second phase.
That's right.
Some of these talks that we had in the evening were just tried to understand that type of work, but he didn't. He wanted to, because I think he understood what these architects, Gropius, Mies, and some of the others were doing. But he had not been brought up in that school, and consequently it was new to him. But he used to ask questions about it, and why do they do this, and why do they do that? He really wanted to know. And I think if he had lived longer, I think he might probably got off from practicing designing that a little more that way.
Barloga worked on the tower for the Rockford News Building, which was designed in the Art Deco style popular in the late 20s and early 30s. This was a style that consciously tried to be modern through an expression that seemed to complement the emerging machine age. In Barloga's adaptation of this style, forms were simplified and streamlined with a kind of futuristic effect. Significantly, Barloga had made a contribution to the vertical skyscraper trend prominent in larger urban centers. This phase in Barloga's professional development contains a telling parallel of opposing styles, especially ironic since two structures he designed in 1934 that dramatically portray this dichotomy were two of his best designs in his entire career. The first of these, the Ryan residence, clearly shows Barloga's continuing experimentation with the Art Deco style. This work is not only one of Barloga's best designs, but a beautiful example of that modern style with its unique balance of decoration and simplicity of form. The spacious surroundings offer a dramatic setting for the simple geometric lines that frame the white cubic blocks that seem to defy all historical pretense. Though Barloga's commitment to European styles that inspired most of his architectural production appears to have been eclipsed by this modern design, a second work, also built in 1934, shows that he indeed did not convert totally to newer styles. With the Clark residence, Barloga created one of the finest historically based designs to be found almost anywhere. No doubt plowing through books containing photographs and original drawings of authentic Tudor manor houses inspired Barloga to once again use an historical source to great advantage. From reproductions found in turn-of-the-century books, still being housed in the library of the Clark residence, Barloga developed one of his best revivalist works.
I think Jess was a very honest person, and I think he believed in being the integrity of the job. It had to be right. And I think, secondly, he had his client would require it, because I'm sure Harold Clark was just as aware of the details of going into the house as Jess was. In fact, if I remember correctly, he furnished Jess with a number of the books on the details that he used.
Other examples of this approach in Barloga's residential designs also show a favorite variation in what is called the Cotswold cottage style.
Of course, his designs are mostly, I call them New England, Cotswold, some of them. And he preferred them. If he tried to go off onto, at that time, what we were calling modern architecture, that was not his field at all.
The landscaping and setting of the Clark residence, the rustic feeling of the skyline, and the picturesque textural detailing are at their best in this recreation of the late medieval world, coming back to life through its architect's magnificent vision. The ability to create two superb examples of architecture, though of dramatically different worlds, certainly attests to Barloga's maturing as an architect of substance rather than fashion. Perhaps these two works represent the state of the architectural profession in which architects of Barloga's generation practiced their art in the midst of a world in transition. In this way, the Clark residence symbolizes the final flowering of traditional design based on the past, while the Ryan residence symbolizes new styles for the future. However, the future for Barloga and his practice would be a limited one. After 1934, he produced only a handful of designs before his death in 1947. One of his last works, developed in 1940, was a design for a facade for West High School. Though not of the architectural caliber of his earlier works, parts of this design offer a fitting tribute to the nobility of Barloga's life as an architect. The figurative reliefs, formed ultimately from sketches drawn by Barloga's associate, Ray Noland, portray an old-world sense of dedication, integrity, and purity, the essential attitudes of artists working in a world that believed in absolute individualism and the possibility of human perfection, a world that was fading as the careers of architects such as Barloga came to a close.
You can't compare just to today's architects. A different type of work, but I guess my comment was that he was so honest and so sincere in his work. That's why I enjoyed working with him.
He would be very unhappy today to see what's going on in the design of a home or an apartment, because in his day he would design something that was either colonial or French, but today you can't classify it, and I think that would be quite a blow to him.
I feel that the 3 years that I was Jess, I learned more design in detail than I did in school. He had a way of doing things that he left a lot of things to your imagination, but his criticism was usually very beneficial to you. And I think as far as the community was concerned, the work he did, of course we've got to go along too with, back in that era, the contractors that were doing this work for Jess were the old school type contractor who did a lot of the work themselves personally. So a lot of the execution of the work that Jess put on paper the outcome is due to the craftsmen on the job too. So it was a very interesting era to work in.
Though Barloga worked only in Rockford and nearby cities and towns, his career was more than provincial. Through his architecture, he provided a distinctive link between the fading world of glorious European high styles and a community geographically and culturally remote from the history of Western international architecture.